I'm sure some of you would remember, and I remember, the first moon landing. It was 1969, the 20th of July. I was then just 10 years old, and my sister was 8, and we lived up in the hills in rural Sri Lanka. There were lots of trees in our garden, and I remember climbing these trees with my sister and playing astronaut, landing the lunar module on the moon. My father was a public officer, and my mother was a teacher. And we had this large box radio in our home. You see, Sri Lanka did not have television in 1969. Sri Lanka did not even have FM radio. All we had was shortwave and medium wave radio. And I remember as a family gathering around this radio, and my father desperately trying to tune in to the voice of America. And through the hiss and crackle and buzz of this shortwave transmission, I heard those great words spoken by Neil Armstrong as he landed on the moon and set foot on the moon. One small step for man, but a giant leap for mankind. 10 years later, I went on to law school and became a lawyer and practiced public interest environmental law. You see, the great outdoors of Sri Lanka had worked its magic on me. 25 years later, I went to the Philippines for a public interest environmental law conference, and we visited Lake Taal. It's a spectacular place, a lake within a lake. And we visited a fishing village on the shores of that volcano. It was a village that was trying to live sustainably. And having finished our work, we got on our boats to come back to the mainland. And then I saw a young woman. She had a little baby in one arm. She was seated on a swing tied to a mango tree. And as she lulled this baby to sleep, she was on the phone. She had a mobile phone in her hand. And she was speaking to somebody somewhere. And it dawned on me that this woman in this remote part of the Philippines was connected to the outside world. You see, technology, information, had made a giant leap. Now, one of the things that perhaps was the greatest threat to the Earth in 1969 was a potential nuclear holocaust because of the Cold War. And the technology of last resort that the presidents of the Soviet Union and the United States would use to avert such a disaster was called the hotline. And this was a telephone, a red telephone, that stood on the desk of the President of the United States in the White House. It was connected by undersea and underground cables to the Kremlin. This was the technology that the presidents would use to avert a human disaster. Today, perhaps, President Obama might send a text message to President Medvedev, or perhaps even better, defriend him on Facebook before he showed his displeasure. But jokes apart, yesterday's threat came to us in the form of a nuclear holocaust, but today's threats come to us in a much more silent and insidious fashion. They're much more dangerous. They come to us in the form of climate change. They come to us in the form of extreme weather events, severe droughts, major floods, raging wildfires, and torrential glacial melts. They come to us in the form of financial meltdowns. Just a little over a month ago, the Earth surpassed the 7 billion mark for the Earth's population. So the challenge of our times, my friends, is how do we feed these 7 billion people? How do we provide them with clean water? How do we provide them with jobs, with shelter? That is the challenge of our times. But the solution to this challenge has always been with us. It's sustainability. It's living sustainably. That is the solution. So why is it that despite all the information and technology that we have, with which we can solve this problem, we have been unable to achieve sustainability? Even 20 years after the Rio Earth Summit, we have not achieved that. Why is that? And I venture to think it's because governments do not have the political will. And I venture to think it's because corporations are unwilling to act in a socially and environmentally friendly manner. And I venture to think that it's because you and I, we the citizens of the earth, we are not prepared. We are reluctant to change our lifestyles to live in a sustainable way. So what is sustainability after all? Sustainability is about learning to live within our means. Sustainability is about respecting the boundaries that nature sets for us. Sustainability is about living in a way that leaves plenty for our children and our grandchildren. And sustainability is about ensuring that the 7 billion people on this earth, that every one of them has a reasonable opportunity at a decent living. But you see, no government, however powerful or wealthy it might be, can achieve sustainability by itself. It needs you and me to change our behavior. It needs corporations to produce the environmentally friendly goods and services that we would need. No company, however wealthy and powerful it might be, can achieve sustainability by itself, because it needs governments to set up the right infrastructure and the enabling environment for them to function, and needs us to create the responsive and responsible markets. And you and I, my friends, we can't achieve sustainability by ourselves either, because we need governments and corporations to support us. You see, sustainability at the scale and speed that we need to meet the challenges of the day can only be achieved if governments, corporations, and people come together as partners. That is the only way we can achieve sustainability. Now, are there examples of these kinds of partnerships around the world? And I say to you, there are many of them. And I'm going to share with you 2 examples. The first of them comes to us from the West African country of Gabon, and the second one comes to us from India. Gabon is blessed with vast forest and mineral resources. It forms part of the great Congo Basin ecosystem, one of the last surviving ecosystems of the earth. And like in many other countries, Gabonese officials kept information about forests and mineral resources very close to their chest. They would not even sometimes share it with each other. But a few years ago, the Gabonese government did the right thing by making this information available to the public. And partly because of external pressure, but also partly because of the World Resources Institute where I work, having a dialogue with that government. So the World Resources Institute took this information and put it on maps. We first mapped the protected areas of Gabon. This was not information that was publicly available. There are many protected areas across Gabon, and they cover many parts of the country. Then we had a dialogue with forest companies, and we got from them information about the forest concessions that had been granted over many years. And we mapped those, and an interesting picture begins to emerge. There are forest concessions very close to or sometimes inside national parks, which are supposed to be protected. There were forest concessions overlapping with one another. We then took the information about mineral licenses and we mapped those. And an even more complex picture begins to emerge. There are mineral licenses granted within protected areas. There are mineral licenses overlapping with each other, mineral licenses overlapping with forest concessions. Clearly, this is not a sustainable picture for Gabon. Much of Gabon would be logged or mined sooner or later. And this was a recipe for conflict, perhaps even very violent conflict. And now imagine people on this map. Imagine the customary tenures that communities have had for years mapped on this. And you begin to see a very complex and difficult challenge. But the Gabonese government has come forward today and formed a collaborative council, bringing together the mining companies, bringing together the forest companies, the civil society groups, the different government agencies, to have a dialogue, a partnership in which they will seek to address this map, this problem, and create a new map which looks much more sustainable. That is the kind of partnership we need to have. My second example comes to you from India. A few years ago, the Indian government passed what was called the Employment Guarantee Act. It was a scheme to try to alleviate poverty in India. The act guaranteed that every single poor person in India would have 100 days of labor each year at the minimum wage. Now, the scheme was very laudable, but it had to be implemented through government officials. Government officials at the state level, government officials at the administrative district level, and government officials at the very local level, the level of the Gram Sabhas, the village councils. And there was massive corruption along the way, a massive leakage of funds. So much so that these poor people who were supposed to be the beneficiaries began to wonder when they were ever going to get these benefits. So they came together in different parts of India. And they started going to their local officials and saying, what happened to this money? Why is it that I didn't get any work when so-and-so got many more than 100 days of work? What happened to the money that was to be spent on the school? There's only a foundation there. These kinds of questions, they came to be called social audits, beneficiaries auditing the government. And interestingly, corruption began to fall. Leakage began to reduce. The scheme became more efficient. Benefits began to be felt by people. It was so successful, these social audits, that the government of India then decided that they needed to make this part of the official process and revise the law, making it part of the administration of the act. Today, if you walk across the Rajasthan deserts of India, you will see walls like this. We call them transparency walls. They're on school buildings, on government buildings. They are walls painted by government officials listing the names of poor people, how many days of labor they were paid for, what happened to the money, what happened to the money that was spent on the mortar and the bricks and the cement. It's there for everybody to see, like this poor woman in India. And poor people are making use of this information, and they're sitting down with the local officials, local government officials, and looking at the accounts. They're asking them the important questions that beneficiaries are entitled to ask of their government. This is the kind of partnership that I'm talking about. Here you see the poorest of the poor in India beginning to form a partnership with the government of India and to ensure that the benefits that were intended for them can actually flow to them. Now, when we talk about partnerships, what comes to your mind first? To my mind, the image that comes to my mind is of business partnerships, of businessmen and women forming partnerships, of companies forming partnerships, of even multinationals entering into joint ventures. These are all different kinds of partnerships. I remember as a young law student studying the law of partnership. The law of partnership is pretty simple. The law of partnership says that partners need to be honest and open with each other. They need to share information about the partnership with each other. One partner can't run away to a corner and hide information of the partnership. Such partnerships don't survive. The second rule of partnership is that partners need to come together and make collective decisions about the partnership. They need to participate together in making decisions about the partnership business. And the third rule of partnership is that at some point in time, perhaps at the end of the year, partners would come together and make an accounting. What was the loss? What was the profit? What was the income? What was the expenditure of the partnership business? And they would decide how to share those losses and profits. Accountability amongst partners is the third rule of partnership. And I remember as a young law student raising my hand and asking my professor where these rules came from, where did they evolve from? And I remember him waving me down and saying, oh, it all came from the law merchant. I wondered to myself, who is the law merchant? And I thought maybe the law merchant was perhaps a merchant who sold law books and therefore dabbled in the law and knew something about the law. And so I went ahead and did my research. And indeed, the law merchant is none of these things. The law merchant is a term of art applied to a body of rules created and practiced by traders, by merchants of medieval Europe. These were the traders who went in and out along the trade routes. They went in and out along the Silk Route through the great Gobi and Taklamakan deserts to China and back. They were the traders who came here to the Middle East and got on their little boats and plied the spice route to India. These were the traders, the hard-nosed businessmen who evolved the rules of partnership, transparency, participation, accountability. That is the only way partnerships work. And these rules don't just come to us from the commercial world. They come to us from the ancient Greek democracies. They come to us through the edicts of King Ashoka the Great of India. They come to us through the little ancient partnerships that were formed way back in China. That is why, my friends, when in 1992, world leaders came together in Rio de Janeiro for the first Earth Summit, they culled together this idea that governments, corporations, and people need to work together in partnership in order to achieve sustainability at the scale and speed that we need to meet our challenges. That is why they put this vision into several documents, Agenda 21, the Rio Declaration, and so on. And to my mind, the Rio Declaration is perhaps the most important of these. And in the Rio Declaration is Principle 10. Now, I don't expect you to read Principle 10, but in Principle 10 of the Rio Declaration is embedded these three principles of partnership: access to information, participation of the public in decision-making, and access to justice or accountability. This is the bedrock, if you like, of the kinds of partnerships we need to build. This is what we need in order to create the enabling environment for us to meet the challenges. That is why, my friends, you and I, we need to join and support the Access for All initiative, special initiative that's coming out of the Eye on the Earth conference, trying to spread Principle 10 around the world. That is why, my friends, you and I, we need to support Brazil's call for a global convention around Principle 10. And that is why, my friends, we need to support the call of Jamaica and Chile for regional conventions, not just in Latin America, but in other regions of the world as well. And that is why, lastly, we need to support UNEP and ensure that it has a robust mandate to help countries implement Principle 10 through the guidelines that have been adopted last year in 2010 in Bali. And I want to leave you with this message that we need to create these partnerships in order to achieve sustainability at the scale and speed we need. We need to create those partnerships, and the only way we can do that is by creating the enabling environment for them: information, participation, and justice. Let us join hands across the world and let us make those partnerships together. Thank you.